Hi, I'm Rachel Cole, and I'm the interim head for Northwestern University's Transportation Library. Today, I'll be talking about some of the changes and challenges that the pandemic presented for our library. I've been in my position for a few months now, but I feel that I must start with this talk with giving proper credit for much of what I'll be talking about today to Roberto Sarmiento, who was the library's director for nearly 25 years and who retired this past May. So just a note to thank Roberto for implementing many of the things I'll be talking about today, as well as laying the groundwork for the future of our library. The pandemic brought about so very many challenges, but also opportunities to reassess our outreach, services, and digitization plans. And I'll be talking about all of those things today. First, a little bit about our library. This is our reading room. We were formed in 1958 to support the university's Transportation Center and the Center for Public Safety. Today, our main purpose is to serve the research needs of the Transportation Center, which is an interdisciplinary center on campus with faculty and students working on a wide range of topics in transportation. Much of the work that comes out of the center is focused on current innovations in transportation. Faculty and students come from across the university, including primarily from the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering, but also economics, journalism, history, the medical school, the School of Law. Really, transportation touches on everything. So in 2022, that means that our researchers are working on topics like urban air mobility, electric, connected, and shared mobility, and as well as things like supply chain disruptions and the impacts of COVID on our transportation systems. In the past, that research might have been in areas like personal rapid transit, monorail, or the formation of the interstate highway system. These are two documents from our collection. On the left is the Louisiana Department of Highways 1965 to 67 biennial report, which is just full of this really beautiful design and collage work illustrating the highway system in Louisiana. And on the right is Mini-Tram for Sheffield, which was a proposal for personal rapid transit in the UK. We also have a small component of special collections, rare books, and historical ephemera related to railroads, airlines, and other areas of transportation. These special collections are used by transportation historians, as well as by our library to create content and reach out to new audiences. Our library went remote in March 2020, and I worked remotely through the fall of 2020. I was one of the earlier workers to return to work at Northwestern University Libraries, due to the need to work with the physical materials and much of the digital outreach that I do specifically. We've had a robust digital communications presence for years. For our researchers working on current transportation research, which is the large bulk of our patrons, much of that current research has always been available electronically. Additionally, our strategy of sharing special collections and raising awareness via digital exhibits, social media, and blog posts kept our patrons aware, informed, and engaged with what was happening in our library during the pandemic. Over the years, beginning in 2016 with the formation of our social media accounts, I started saving copies of the images that I posted to social media in a folder on my desktop, so the scans of the items in our collection. During the pandemic, this turned out to be extremely useful. I don't generally like to reuse images or reuse posts, but during the pandemic, when there was no possibility of going into the library, it was nice occasionally to be able to share an image from several years ago to keep the accounts lively and active and engaged with our patrons. And so I did reintroduce previously posted collections items to our longtime followers, as well as introducing them to the first time for our new followers. Like many institutions, the demand for digitization at Northwestern is great. A system is in place to select materials from across the libraries for digitization. This includes University Library, which is the main NU library, as well as music, special collections, archives, transportation, and the Herskovits Library of African Studies. This, of course, requires prioritization of projects for digitization, a bit of competition among us, friendly competition for what gets selected, and it's important to submit a project that has a good chance of being selected by the digitization committee. So in selecting materials to be digitized, I had 5 criteria for this year's selection. Number 1 was the uniqueness of the collection. Here we are looking at an extremely unique item. It's a hard hat from CN Rail, part of our Finzer collection. And one imagines that the worker who wore this originally was working on the railroad and carved sort of, put the names of some of his favorite bands into this hat, drew them into this hat artistically. So we have the Smiths and various other bands names on this hat that he wore on the railroad. So uniqueness of collection is criteria number 1. So are there other institutions such as libraries, museums, or archives that have a collection similar to the one we're proposing or who have it digitized? To determine this, I performed searches in WorldCat, Google, and HathiTrust, as well as on the websites of specialized transportation libraries and museums to be sure that the collections I was proposing were unique. Criteria 2 is research value, both internal and to the larger transportation community. So I thought about how collections might be used and whether there were researchers at our institution who were working on projects that could use these materials. This year I submitted 3 proposals, which I presented to the Transportation Center's chair before presenting the project to the selection committee. I was hoping to get the chair's input and his support, which I knew would be helpful in making a successful proposal. Knowing that our library is also used by patrons outside of NU, I also look at external engagement with our collections. This includes monitoring requests for scans, engagement with posts on social media, blogs, and digital exhibits. For example, a blog post from several years ago on Great Lakes passenger steamships still gets pretty good engagement years later. The post was based on our collection, Great Lakes Passenger Steamship Pamphlets. So this was a factor in proposing this collection for digitization this year. This collection was also used in part by one of our English faculty in a class that was on Lake Michigan and Chicago. And so that was an important criteria, including it as well. The faculty input and the faculty use of our collections and student use as well is very important. There's also future use potential. I'm sorry, I'm going to head back one slide. I forgot to mention the image that we're looking at is a pamphlet from the Great Lakes steamship, the SS Roosevelt, which departed from Chicago at the Michigan Avenue Bridge for this one, from the Michigan Avenue Bridge to Benton Harbor and St. Joseph across the lake in Michigan. And again, it's from our Great Lakes passenger steamships collection. Future potential is another criteria. Is there a future project that your library will use this for example, a future digital exhibit? This was a digital exhibit that was underway during the pandemic. Its future is in question right now, but the postcard and the potential use of this collection is still very relevant. The postcard is a Bucharest Airport, and it's from our William Luke collection. So future digital exhibits would be one priority. There are ideas for future exhibits based on transportation planning and the innovations of the past, and there will be future proposals that include related materials to that. We also look if a faculty member is working with a collection you're working with as well and might find future use there too. Curatorial knowledge of the collection is also a factor. This includes things like how digitized materials fit into the rest of the collection and how they might lead to discovery of other areas of your collection. As the librarian or curator for your collection, you're the person most familiar with the materials that you have. I select every book that comes into our library, inventory every incoming donation, and digitization projects are always on my mind when I'm doing this work. I also manage the library's social media accounts and curate our digital exhibits. And so this includes a direct line of communication with our patrons, both internal and external, our students, faculty, and the general public, comment or send messages that often illuminate aspects of the collection that I don't know about yet. Donors also like to see their materials featured and will get in touch with additional information about what's going on there, or potentially a related donation to what they see featured in our social media or digital exhibits. So all of this work involves sifting very closely through our collections in search of materials for exhibits or materials to share on social media. And it all leads to a close familiarity with our collections, both processed and unprocessed. And it helps inform decisions about digitization. And then finally, promoting collections. I mentioned earlier that our collections are designed to support the cutting edge transportation research happening in the Transportation Center. Today, that's projects, like I mentioned earlier, including autonomous vehicles or urban air mobility. In decades past, it might have been things like early transportation planning studies that looked at land use and transportation development. Among these is the Chicago Area Transportation Study, or CATS, which was an early and influential project that helps to tell the story of how Chicago came to be shaped the way that it has been. This project came to mind for digitization pre-pandemic when I was introduced to a visiting speaker at the university's transportation center who expressed the wish that that he could use this collection remotely, based as he is at a university in California. I also saw this as a potential to further promote this collection and increase use among the transportation planning community. This is a particularly great cover. The early issues of Cat's Meow, which was the agency's newsletter, featured artwork by who I'm assuming are employees of CATS, and this was a Halloween sort of issue. So after digitization, then what? Shown here is an item from our our Great Lakes Passenger Steamship collection, formerly known as our Inland Water Pamphlets collection. So following digitization, we worked to promote digitized collections. It's been my mission to make our library collections relevant, interesting, and accessible to a broad audience of users, both within academia and among the interested public. Digitization gives us one of our best opportunities to do that. Knowing that the majority of our users would not likely find this fabulous collection of late 19th and early 20th century pamphlets on passenger transportation on the Great Lakes, using the terms in the previously assigned collection name, which was Inland Water Pamphlets, I chose to rename the collection before digitization, using a name that I thought more precisely described its contents, and in the interest of discovery, using less jargon. And so it is now the Great Lakes Passenger Steamship Pamphlets collection. Following each digitization project, there's also a checklist that I go through to make sure we're reaching our audience. So this includes things like emailing interested parties, including the transportation community, groups interested in the items being digitized and the like, as well as the department that we serve here on campus. And then the Transportation Center then shares these collections in its quarterly newsletter, which reaches students and faculty at Northwestern, and then also interested parties from beyond in the transportation business world and whatnot as well. We also do social media promotion on Twitter, where the widespread sharing of posts really increases exposure, as well on Instagram, where I find the stories module to be an effective way of combining multiple images and text to really tell the story of a collection. Blog posts are another key component, and they've led to things like speaking engagements and the sharing of collections with a transit agency conference on campus. Blog posts were repurposed for the Journal of a Rare Books Society and reshared with a broad audience in the pages of an online national publication as well. So really getting these collections out to a broad community of scholars as well as the general interested public. And then finally, we can assess use with the following items. Our library's digitization portal includes a dashboard that lets backend users see the number of views of collections and items, the source that brought them to the portal, and which collections are being most frequently viewed. We also, after digitizing items, will see upticks in calls and visits from researchers who are interested in learning more about digitized and related collections. This really trails on years after the initial digitization. There's an increased use in the collections generally once they're digitized, even years later. And then these digitized materials are also used in classes at the university and outside the university as well. I've worked with professors from other institutions to have material shared in their classes. And we see increases for rights, permissions, and reproduction requests as well. So it's not possible to digitize everything in our collections for a multitude of reasons, but selectively and strategically choosing what will be valuable to ourselves and to our researchers helps to connect our users with materials they'll be able to use. If you have any questions, please contact me. It's rachel.cole@northwestern.edu, or you can find me on social media and the Transportation Library on social media as well. And I will also be at the annual conference this year. So if you have any questions or would like to talk digitization or transportation collections, please come find me. Thanks for your time. And next we'll have Michael Molina from the Oklahoma Transportation Library.
All right, great. Thank you, Rachel. Yes, my name is Michael Molina. I'm the librarian for the Oklahoma Transportation Library. And I'm going to share a little bit about what our library is about and kind of our early COVID experience and some of the some of the challenges that we had to grapple with as a small library in a relatively small state with limited resources. So hopefully we'll find some of this useful for your own library. So a little bit about our library. The Oklahoma Transportation Library is the official library for the Oklahoma Department of Transportation. We house around 15,000 unique items, both physical and digital, and we're in the unique position of being based on a university campus rather than at the DOT headquarters. We're on the second floor of the building in that image. Ideally, we'd like to have the whole building, but I don't think administration is ready to give us that much power yet. We provide transportation resources ranging from published research reports, monographs, journal articles, training manuals, maps, photos, and more. Like I mentioned, it's a smaller library with myself being the solo librarian, and we have one student worker. On a typical day, we may have students coming in needing resources for an assignment, or engineers from our Department of Transportation coming to visit or emailing us, trying to get resources or familiarize themselves with our collection. All that changed by March 2020 when the first COVID cases started appearing on campus. Like many schools across the country, the University of Oklahoma shut down in-person activities for the foreseeable future. This left us without access to our physical collection. We didn't yet have a plan in place on how to react, and we had several key issues that needed addressing. First, what would our daily duties consist of if we couldn't access our physical collection? Then, could we still keep our student worker on if they didn't have access to campus? Next, did we have enough digital materials to be able to still function as a library? After all, we'll still need to lend out materials, and if we can't access our physical location, then we really have to rely on our digital resources. Lastly, what were the ways we could innovate to make the most of a bad situation? One of our first steps was ensuring that we would be able to keep our student worker. Work from home employees were set up with a VPN and were able to access important files through a secure network. We had a shared drive set up with the school and were able to store all of our content on this shared drive. The student worker could access the files and carry out duties just as if they were in the office, minus the social interaction. This provided us extra time for one of our big projects involving catalog remediation. Many of our entries contained broken links or needed updated metadata, and in general, a good cleaning. To start, we began identifying catalog entries in our collection that needed improvement, either by editing the metadata or updating links, or attaching downloadable files to each entry. This last part was one of the biggest projects we wanted to focus on, as it would help our lending capabilities to have more downloadable files rather than relying on our now inaccessible physical collection. As many of our reports were publicly funded and copyright free, it was only a matter of tracking down the digital file and attaching it to the entry in the catalog. To support this effort, we took the opportunity to begin a massive digitization project. We went from having a few hundred items being digitally accessible to a few thousand, with added download links or attached files for a lot of our catalog entries. This was made possible as we were slowly let back into the building. If we couldn't find a digital copy online, we would scan materials from our own library. We were fortunate enough to have a large flatbed scanner that could be fed dozens of pages at a time, as well as a bookbinder for rebinding books that were deconstructed during the scanning process. To keep things safe, we purchased extra sanitizers, face masks, and implemented rules for wiping down everything that we used. We also staggered our shifts so that there would only be one person working in the building at a time. We conducted our business purely through online contact. That meant if a person needed to borrow something, they would reach out to us via email or our online Ask a Librarian feature, and we would be able to send them what they needed. If we didn't have the item they requested in a digital format, we bumped their request up to the top of the queue and made a digital copy right then and there. Essentially, for a time, we operated as an on-demand digitization lab. We worked in isolated shifts, digitizing materials and ensuring our collection would be usable during the pandemic. This expanded our collection's online offerings tremendously, providing invaluable time for us to focus on this project. We still have a ways to go to ensure that most of our collection is downloadable directly from the catalog, but working from home during the pandemic and the limited access we had as we slowly opened back up again really helped speed this process along. With online being the only way patrons could access the library, we needed to find new ways to provide content. In addition to the digitization project, the library website promoted regular updates and news postings from the transportation field, including links to new online resources and regularly updated news feeds from the Federal Highway Administration and Transportation Research Board. These news feeds were coded into our website so that they would automatically populate with new updates every day so that visitors would always see the latest information. In addition to these features, working from home allowed us time to revamp the website, fixing broken links, working on Section 508 and ADA accessibility for our web users, and redesigning several pages to be more user-friendly. Things like working on appropriate color contrast and making sure that our website was more ADA friendly for those with accessibility issues, such as color blindness, were prioritized. While being temporarily shut out of the physical space was jarring, it provided extra time for projects that would have taken much longer before and allowed us to have a stronger online presence. So if online was going to be the way to go for the foreseeable future, we would want to put our best foot forward. The only question we had was, how do we exactly do that beyond what we're already doing with the website? So in an effort to do just that, we explored the idea of creating a virtual space for visitors in lieu of visiting our physical location. While we had our online catalog for patrons to browse, there was a missing element. Our catalog was entirely too text heavy, and one didn't really get a sense of the personality of the library and what you could expect when reaching out to staff or requesting resources. With that frame in mind, we set about designing the Oklahoma Transportation Virtual Library. More than just a searchable text-based catalog, it provided a visual space where people could look at library resources, hear videos from our sponsors, and listen to narration from the librarian describing our offerings. The original idea was to take pictures of the library from various vantage points and arrange them spatially to represent what someone would be seeing if they were standing in that location. For example, the first screen would be looking at the entrance to the library. The next screen would be once a visitor stepped through the doors. Clicking on the left or the right of the screen would then show what someone would be seeing if they went left or right in the building. This was accomplished through a website called Genial. It is generally used as a slideshow platform, but we made use of interactive buttons or widgets that one could click on, which would take them to any other slide in the series. So, for example, at the main view inside the library, there's a button to navigate to the left. Clicking on the button will take the visitor to the slide that is linked to that button. Other labeled buttons appeared throughout the library and when clicked on would provide more information, narration, and links to resources contained within the library. With the virtual library, a patron can explore the entirety of the building, seeing everything from the comfort of their own home that a person would if they'd driven all the way to the library itself. The virtual library concept proved to be a large success, receiving backing and a special video introduction by the Oklahoma Department of Transportation's Director of Capital Programs. Engagement with this new resource was large, with numerous visitors from both in-state and out-of-state visiting the website. Now, while the website host does not provide tracking numbers, that information was easily found by linking the website through Google Analytics. Other ways we adapted, including expanding our catalog of ebooks. For transportation libraries, engineers in training have to take an exam to become licensed engineers. And in the past, we'd been getting most of our training manuals for the exam in physical formats. During the pandemic, we shifted to purchasing more ebook versions of the manuals in addition to the physical copies. The ebook versions were a bit restrictive in that we could only afford a few licenses to access the books, meaning only one or two people could read the book at a time. But it was an important shift in our collection development strategy. And this brings up another important aspect, namely the budget. Our entire fiscal year had been planned out before the pandemic even started, with allocations for travel, purchasing, programs, and more. We were quickly realizing that travel was not going to be happening for a very long time. We shut down in March, and our budget ran until the end of September. Our question was, do we keep our finances as is and hope for a return to normal? Or do we take a gamble and shift funds around to adapt to the changing reality? Luckily, we were fortunate enough to have very flexible support, both from our university and Department of Transportation sponsors. For the travel budget, we identified which conferences we were going to attend that were being canceled, and we could move funding from that into our ebook budget, as well as subscription services for websites such as our virtual library. We were able to remain nimble to shift our focus and time to make an impact and help assist our patron needs. So for lessons learned, while the pandemic upended how we conducted normal operations, we found ways to adapt and serve our patrons better than before. Ensuring digitization of library materials was key. If we didn't have PDFs to send out, there essentially would not have been a library. Fortunately, we worked on a digitization project that greatly expanded our offerings. We ensured there wouldn't be any loss of productivity by providing tools for employees to stay connected at home and adopted safeguards when we were told to return to work. We expanded resources and accessibility on our website and created a new virtual portal for patrons to explore, find resources, and connect with staff. We were also able to expand our ebook content through budget realignments, which our library committee supported. In the end, our biggest strengths were our flexibility, staying connected, and coming up with innovative solutions to reach patrons no matter where they were. And I firmly believe that to be a good librarian, you also need to be a good salesman. So bear with me here as I promote our virtual library and take a couple minutes to quickly show how to access it. So first, you can follow the link here at www.oktl.org. Let me see if this will work. Once I click on it, it should open up. All right. All right, so you should be seeing our website page right now. If I could ask my fellow panelists, could you confirm that the website is showing up on your screen?
Yes, it is.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so if you go to oktl.org, you can scroll down and you can see the virtual library button. Go ahead and click on that. And that's going to take you to our main virtual library page. And from here, you can either click on the buttons at the top if you want to go directly to a category and don't want to waste time exploring. But personally, I would recommend exploring the library. So generally, we'll click on enter and it takes you to the main library page where you can click on any item that interests you. For example, you want to take a look at the map collection and bookshelf. We'll click on this button and it takes you right there. And say you want to look at our ODOT map collection, we can click on this little I button right here, and it takes you to a link that shows the different maps and archives that we have related to that option. There's a back button on every page that you can click on to go back to where you were, and you can click on any item of interest that you see in the library to explore, look at services, contact a librarian, or even check out books that we have accessible in PDF form. So that's just a real quick tour of our library, and I hope you can check it out. So that's one of the fun things we did during the pandemic. So with that, I'll stop sharing and turn it over to Marilee.
Thank you, Michael. Okay. My name is Marilee Tuitt, and I'm the Reference and Digital Services Librarian for the University of Minnesota Center for Transportation Studies in a shared role with MnDOT Library. And MnDOT is short for Minnesota Department of Transportation. In this presentation, I will describe 3 efforts how MnDOT Library pivoted during the pandemic to make resources more readily available to MnDOT employees around the state, as many have continued working from home, as well as members of the public. Before I go into detail about each effort, first I will give a little background about MnDOT Library. It was established in 1957 in St. Paul. We are considered a special library because the focus is primarily transportation and engineering, along with management, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and lots of other professional development resources to support MnDOT's everyday business. While our main customers are MnDOT employees, city and county engineers, and transportation researchers, we also answer questions from the public. The library does many traditional functions such as reference, cataloging, circulation, ILL, e-resources, and website maintenance. We have a physical space that reopened to the public a couple months ago when MnDOT buildings reopened all together on the same day. Some other functions, we also do in-depth research, current awareness alerts, and digitization. Before 2020, we had approximately 17,000 physical items in the library space. And we also received 2 daily newspapers that were visited by several people throughout a workday. We had some digital resources in licensed databases that contain ASCE journals, ASTM standards. There's an organization called AASHTO that produces a lot of digital publications for the transportation field. And this is in addition to all of the digital research reports that MnDOT produces. In these days, our department publications are born digital. For several years, we've been thinking about a solution to provide persistent links for these publications, as well as digitized publications that were produced decades ago. MnDOT library staff have undertaken 3 main efforts to transition to digital products and services since 2020. We digitized the process of routing periodicals, started offering ebooks via Cloud Library, and have been preparing to launch MnDOT Digital Library. These were ideas that we had talked about for several years, and their implementation was inspired or accelerated by the pandemic when many started teleworking. Routing periodicals and offering ebooks are specific to MnDOT employees, while the upcoming digital library will be a public resource, a repository of the department's official publications and assets from over the years. And while MnDOT buildings reopened to the public at the end of April, a couple months ago, library staff had been going in on an as-needed basis for the past 2 years. And since this spring, many have opted to continue a fully remote or hybrid situation. For many years, the routing service has been a statewide service available to all MnDOT employees intended to help them stay informed of professional interests. Before 2020, we had started to automate a handful of periodicals by setting up an EBSCO alert that would email the list of employees for that particular, who were signed up for that periodical, when a new issue was available. But that was not an option for many journals and magazines that we subscribe to. Therefore, we continue to route the vast majority in print to employees via interoffice mail. The image on the slide is an example of transport topics with a routing slip stapled to the top. It would route to 1 or 2 people at a time, and the employee had to return the item in 3 days to the library. if a publication had several people on the overall routing list, it could take a couple weeks to reach the final person via interoffice mail. You can imagine that there were delays due to someone on vacation, out sick, or they just lost track of the periodical on the desk. Routing print periodicals was a time-consuming process for library staff to track and manage. Then in March 2020, when employees started working from home and were discouraged from entering MnDOT buildings, they couldn't receive the print periodicals previously routed in interoffice mail. We suspended routing for a brief time and looked into digital options. In summer of 2020, we distributed a survey to ask for feedback on the routing situation and found that 87% supported receiving the digital version going forward. And then that fall of 2020, we made some changes in the annual contract with our subscriptions provider, WT Cox. And now we either email the link of a recent issue or in some cases, the PDF to the routing list for a specific periodical. The image on the slide is a screenshot of an email sending a recent issue of Transport Topics. For a few periodicals, the table of contents is sent out and the routee can respond with the titles of the articles that they would like to see in full text. There is still the option to be added to the periodicals that have an EBSCO alert option, which will automatically email the employee when a new issue is released. And a few periodicals are still delivered in print via interoffice mail to employees who just strongly prefer print and who have been regularly working in the buildings. We have found that digital routing saves staff time, even though it's not a uniform process for every publication. And we continue to track digital routing in a spreadsheet. We've also found that it works well in a telework hybrid environment that meets the needs of many MnDOT employees. So next, some people might think, why did we pursue an ebooks platform at all? But first, let me back up that our first try with ebooks was in 2010 with 6 Kindles preloaded with a few dozen titles. The Kindle itself was available for checkout. This was moderately popular in the beginning, but then over the years, interest in the Kindles declined. Most employees seem to prefer using their own device. Besides the individual's preference to use their own device, several other reasons converged in 2020. There was a desire to offer easy access to reading materials for professional development during widespread telework. MnDOT offers a leadership development program that encourages reading books on various management and leadership topics. Then MnDOT had an overall interest to expand the diversity, equity, and inclusion collection, especially in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. We gathered information on several ebook platform options and determined that Cloud Library was a solid option that would be accessible to all 4,500 plus MnDOT employees. They could simply download the app and then on their phone or other device and then choose an ebook. No interoffice mail would be needed. And the Cloud Library had an affordable cherry pick option that was right for us. What I mean by cherry pick is that we had the ability to choose specific titles instead of the pay per use option. Pay per use would mean access to the Cloud Library's entire collection. And that didn't really work because that would include thousands of fiction and young adult titles that weren't really appropriate for our needs. The setup timeline was about 6 months in 2020. We started with 30 titles based on research and staff suggestions. We could catalog the ebooks in our ILS, which is Alma, using MARC records supplied by Cloud Library. We configured virtual shelves in the app for browsing by topic. You can see a few in the image on the slide. Topics include COVID-19, racism and social justice, bicycling, communication, diversity and inclusion, human resources, teleworking, and several others. We have found that it is easy to add new titles, and so far Cloud Library Selection meets our needs for professional development. It's easier to support virtual book clubs for MnDOT's employee resource groups since we don't have the logistics of sending print books. After the user knows their library ID in the app, it is pretty user-friendly to navigate. We have also learned that the ebooks need ongoing marketing. Despite many positive comments from upper management, the ebooks haven't circulated a lot. So that is kind of like with any new library service, it deserves a lot of marketing. We've also started offering some e-audiobooks in Cloud Library based on user feedback. And at the bottom of the slide, there's the public link to MnDOT's ebooks collection if you would like to take a closer look. The third effort I will talk about is organizing MnDOT's publications in a single digital environment. They have been stored in several places over the years, and the images show digital repositories that serve great purposes. The first one is MnDOT's eDocs system, and it's good at storing internal documents. It's not as great at finding them, and a results page doesn't really give you thumbnail images, which is problematic for the maps and photos that we would like to be able to provide in a digital library. National Transportation Library's Rosa P is wonderful, and it is great for research reports and some other kind of high profile research related reports, but it's not the best spot for some of our digitized historical items like employee newsletters. And then on the far right is the homepage for the Minnesota Digital Library, which is mainly for items of historical or cultural interest. It's not an option for our research reports or, say, annual reports from the Bridge office. And then finally, another place where we have some digital reports stored is in the University of Minnesota's Digital Conservancy. But the limitation there is that an item must have an author or a PI connected to the University of Minnesota, an affiliation, in order for it to be contributed there. Furthermore, the MnDOT website is implementing a policy that PDFs need to move out of their web server by the end of this year, by December 31st, 2022. And from there on out, anything that you would like to open as a PDF needs to be stored in a different kind of link. So none of the above is sort of a one-size-fits-all option to store MnDOT produced official publications, including some of the more mundane reports that have been produced over the decades. And MnDOT library staff has long wanted a user-friendly repository that can house these publications with persistent links. So in early 2021, we decided to proceed with Islandora, which is an open source platform built on Drupal that is also hosted and supported by PALS. PALS is the state consortium that has provided our catalog and ILS for many years. After the purchasing and agreement process was finalized a year ago in the summer of 2021, we began the many-step process to set up the digital library. The setup process has been a team effort with, I would say, hundreds of decisions along the way. We determined controlled vocabulary for various metadata fields, how we would name and organize collections. We've been preparing a batch ingest, and we've also been busy digitizing some print-only items that you would normally find on the shelves in the physical library. We found that we could handle some digitization in-house with MnDOT's printing services, especially if it was a publication in a standard size, such as the series of state-made reports from the 1970s and 80s. However, we decided to outsource a set of oversized books published by what MnDOT was formerly known as Minnesota Department of Highways in the 1950s and 60s, because the oversized books were obviously not a standard size. And several of them had pages that would fold out into maps or other complicated graphics. We're currently testing the ingest form and making some final decisions about the site theme and browse and search options. It will be on Islandora version 8. And we anticipate that the public site will launch at the end of the summer. The image included on the slide is just a screenshot of the test site for now. We still welcome overlap when a report is available in more than one repository, because the idea is that will increase findability. We're just really looking forward to having this platform where we can store things and feel rest assured that the links will persist. Thank you for viewing this. Please contact me with any questions about digitizing the routing of periodicals, starting a small ebooks program, or preparing to launch a digital library. And my email is listed there. And I believe that concludes the 3 presentations in this session. Thank you very much for tuning in.